and we will go ahead and call the Task Force to Prevent and End Homelessness to order at 4:02. Clerk, could you please read the roll for us?
Dr. Bustles, Mr. McDowell, Mr. Brennan,
Present.
Chief Holbrook, Mr. Pennell, Mr. Cook, Mr. Whitehead. He's sending an excuse. Ms. Farrell, she's been represented by Ms. Allison Smith on today. Thank you. Mr. Wilkerson, thank you. Mr. Cluse, Ms. McCullough, Judge McCullough, Judge Brock.
Here, present.
Thank you. Ms. Sutton? Here. Mr. Flores? Ms. Skelton? Here. Mr. Ogborn? Here. And Mr. Dobbins? Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Thank you all.
All right. I would now entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the June 29th meeting. Is there a second? All right. Well, then do we need to call roll again or?
Any opposed?
Okay. All in favor of approving last meeting's minutes? Awesome. All opposed? All right. The minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the third meeting of the Mayor's Task Force to Prevent and End Homelessness. That's a long title. I just realized that when I was saying it. But thank you again for sticking with us for such an important topic, a topic that we want to take forward as a major quality of life issue that we all recognize needs some TLC from us. I think the biggest thing for today, to know where we've come from to where we want to go is to how we got here and the current state of services that our wonderful partners in this city provide. We have been busy in the 2 months from the first meeting, second meeting, and here we are, third one, working with staff, bringing forward ideas for consideration here in the future to this task force to eventually bring forward. As you can see, it takes everybody, businesses, communities, the religious sector to make it happen. We lean on a lot of involved groups. We had a case study to look at this week. Our CPD shut down a store that I think we can all agree on was a nuisance to not just one neighborhood, but several, a business district, a hospitality district. And Chief, can you just give a couple comments on that? I'm sure people read in the newspaper about your initiatives on that.
Yes, sir. So just in summary, I think most people know what was referred to as the Blue Store. It was mentioned in our last meeting when they reviewed the 2013 Task Force report that it had some key findings. One was that particular business was identified as one that was a problem, and I think for the purposes of our conversations, the problem that we saw that was just one of many factors, but that we saw that store was contributing, and I would argue was taking advantage of some of those that were down on their luck and suffering from addiction. They seemed to be a fueling spot for a voluminous number of purchases by people that were experiencing homelessness in any area. Oftentimes they were the same folks that we would see aggressively panhandling and obstructing traffic and at times being intimidating and being intoxicated. So over the course of probably the last 18 months, we were really taking a hard look, looking at some numbers, reviewing our reports. There was in excess of 200 calls for service. A lot of it was quality of life type violations that a lot of it centered around alcohol sales and alcohol abuse and public intoxication and other things that come with that. We had some, a few serious assaults, but it was I don't believe it was a surprise to anybody that we were looking at this particular store and just the pattern of practice of the operations. I think, it may have been a surprise that we were able to take some affirmative action, but again, hopefully it will be impactful for the immediate area and the surrounding neighborhoods, but also maybe impactful on removing an impediment or something that is contributing to some of the problems that some of our people experiencing homelessness are suffering as far as addiction.
Great, thank you. Safely providing those services, we recognize that. And that was a big reason CPD and city took that initiative. We want to, the reason we asked the groups to present today is because they are wonderful partners, either directly or indirectly, with the city when it comes to funding and partnering in services. We're going to hear from 5 groups today. Do you want to comment on the 5 questions that were sent out, or go for it?
Yeah. So as you all know, we've been having a lot of meetings in between these meetings to really understand the breadth of services, what our different options are, what the history is. As Chief alluded to, we had a task force in 2013 that had some strategies that very much align with some of the conversations that we've been having. And so it was really important for us to get our providers that work very closely with people experiencing homelessness or the unsheltered population in the room to share their experiences, but also for us to have a collaborative discussion around some of the issues that you all have raised. So prior to today's meeting, we sent 4 questions over to our providers. And so when Councilman Brennan mentioned that they are directly and indirectly funded, as a reminder, we have a number of funds from our community development dollars that trickle down from federal HUD funding. And we also have our general fund dollars, which is direct city money. And it's about $1 million or so direct funding, and then a couple million in terms of community development. And so we really look at that as our city's investment in the prevention of homelessness. And so we really believe that this is a pivotal point for us to start thinking about really addressing some of the gaps that you all have discussed during this task force meeting and through other avenues, as I know that we've been having a lot of discussions about this top of mind issue. So the 4 questions that we shared really come from some of our previous task force discussions. Some of our providers, they were really thoughtful and submitted their answers in writing, and we have provided that to you all. And I ask that you take a couple minutes to read their responses because they are very thoughtful and really get you thinking about some of the discussions that we've had. So the question number 1 is, CPD estimates that there are approximately 200 to 250 unsheltered homeless. What are your recommendations for addressing the growing number of unsheltered homeless on the street? As a reminder, this task force decided that, of course, we can't solve every facet of homelessness, but we can focus on the most timely and urgent issue, and that is the unsheltered population that we typically see interacting within our entertainment districts and our neighborhoods. Question number 2 is, the task force has identified a lack of coordination and services after 5 p.m. What would you suggest on how to address this? Our last task force meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about this, with business owners talking about how that's typically when they see an increase in their patrons, but don't really know who to call, and how police typically becomes kind of the default. And then also recognizing that there aren't really a lot of options after the 9 to 5 or weekend hours. And then finally, based on the great work of Inspire Real Change, who has been our research consultant throughout this, the task force has identified over 100 services in the Richland County area addressing homelessness. How can these services be better streamlined to address the needs of the unsheltered population? Where do you see your role? And so one thing we learned from Tracy's presentation last meeting was it's not that Columbia doesn't care, because we have some really amazing programs But they really are pretty widely spread all over Richland County. And what are some ways in which we can streamline that and ensure that we have a very deliberate response and are really addressing all of the different facets that people have recognized that contribute to homelessness or are a consequence of that? So with that, I believe we will go ahead and get started. We've given the providers about 10 minutes, and that doesn't include time for questions. So we ask that you all think of some and wait to ask those questions after they give their presentation. And really, today's meeting is dedicated to our discussion with providers, but in the interest of ensuring that all 5 can present, we'll limit it to 10 minutes, and we'll try and keep you all on that time schedule. And then, of course, we'll have time during committee discussion if there's anything else that arises that you all want to talk about. So we thought we would start with our general funding recipients. So this is that $1 million to support our inclement weather center. And currently, that is 3 entities. That is United Way, Transitions, and the USC Housing First program. So I would love to invite Jennifer from United Way to come up and present.
Jennifer Moore, United Way. Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm going to keep my phone here so I can make sure I'm within 10 minutes. We sent our responses in advance, so I hope that you have that. I see you have one there, so thank you. Anyone in the audience, I have extra copies I'm happy to give out after. If it's okay, what I thought I might do is just kind of hit some of the high points and then see what questions you have, because I know you guys have been really digging in and doing hard work. So, and I feel like my back is to both of you, so I'm sorry. So looking at the responses itself, so what we wanted to do first is just kind of give you a little glimpse of United Way. So we are a 6-county United Way. We work in the field of health and human services. So we fund a variety of programs, from children's programs through senior programs and things like that. So we work typically for our unrestricted funding with what are called certified impact partner agencies that go through a vetting and a review process to understand their financial stability and their governance practices and to make sure that they're compliant with standards of nonprofit practices for state law. Specifically in the role of homelessness, what we wanted to do is kind of point out that we have 3 roles in this space to kind of talk through a little bit. The first one is we're a funder. So we are the community's largest private funding source of homeless and emergency services. There are government entities that provide more than we do. Certainly the federal government does. But we do have a big role in that space. So we provide $2.3 million this year for emergency services, emergency shelters, street outreach, and prevention services. When I say prevention, I'm talking about rent, mortgage, utility services to prevent homelessness, because that's an incredible need in our community. This past year, we started a 2-generation approach, specifically looking at families experiencing homelessness or those who are precariously housed. I know you guys are really focused on unsheltered in this setting, but our 2-generation approach really works with the caregivers to work on their workforce skills and improving their housing stability over time, and then working with services for the children in the family. And these are through partnerships with our school districts is how we get the referrals there. So this is a new initiative that we have through a private foundation. We also, through our Mackenzie Scott gift that we were amazingly fortunate to receive about a year ago, we have dedicated $5 million to affordable housing. And we see that as a range of housing. So just good, affordable, safe, decent rental property for a variety of incomes, to voucher-supported housing, to permanent supportive housing. We currently have funded 2 projects around home repairs, and that is to prevent homelessness, particularly with people with disabling condition and seniors. And then we have 3 projects that we are working on right now that are incredibly exciting. I can't mention them right now, but they're very, very exciting, and they'll add about 160 new units here in Richland and Lexington County, because we believe in geographic diversity as well of housing. So that's the funding. Number 2, research and data collection. So we operate on behalf of the local homeless coalition, which I'll talk about in just a second, the Homeless Management Information System. So this is the internet-based database that our shelters and service providers use in the community. So the vast majority of our I call them more of our mainstream, not the grassroots organizations that you would think of, but our large providers use the system. This is how you log a shelter stay. This is how you log a client clients attaining stable housing, increasing their income. It's how providers can coordinate services across agencies as well. So you can see if a client is working with this agency and they come to you for a different service, you have the ability to communicate in the system with that other agency. So this is our HMIS system, which is very important for homeless coordination. We do research also on the information we get from the system. So an example right now of a current research is we are working with Chapin Hall, which is the nation's leading expert in youth homelessness. We are cohort communities with Austin, Texas, and New York City, and we are trying to discover the pathways of youth homelessness using administrative data sources through our state data warehouse. So that's very exciting. The third way is we are the lead for the local homeless continuum of care, bringing in federal resources for homelessness. So our community has a local homeless coalition called the Midlands Area Consortium for the Homeless, MOC, and so I hope everybody comes to their next meeting, which is next Friday on the 26th at 10 a.m. We host them at United Way because we have a great space. But really in our role, and you can see on the second page, it kind of goes through some of the responsibilities that we help them with. But MOC was established in 1994. It is an all-volunteer organization that covers 13 counties here in the Central Midlands. There's 4 continues of care in the state. What our role really is to secure federal resources for housing for people who are experiencing homelessness and all the federal compliance that comes along with that. So this year, that will equate to about $3.5 million for 500 plus units of housing. And so that's individuals and families with children, so equates to much more than 500 people. So I'm going to skip over, again, I have the listing of those continuum of care kind of things that we do on the back, and I'm happy to kind of pause for a second and see if there's any questions before I go into the recommendations.
I have a quick question about
Sure.
MOC.
Yes, sir.
Probably have a large attendance to that. Do local cities, counties, towns send representatives to
Yeah.
that to
Ye-
participate and listen?
Yeah, absolutely, and we would love to have city staff there. That's great. We typically have strong representation. I know from Richland, Lexington County, Rock Hill comes, we have City of Rock Hill that comes down and things like that. I know in the past, we've had city representation. I think we've had CPD there as well. So yeah, we would love to have strong, regular participation. That would be amazing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And similar, as we're thinking through kind of the different entities and coalitions and opportunities from a federal level, and there's certainly a lot coming down the pike.
Yep.
One of the things that, we've been thinking about and would love to have your insight on is, Rock Hill is very different than Columbia, which is very different than Allendale. And so when you think about 13 different counties, that's a very large coalition of counties. And Columbia is one of the only that has that low barrier shelter-like transitions.
Correct.
Have you seen that we are maybe taking on the burden of those other counties because we are the only ones that invest in those services?
Well, I'll say City of Rock Hill has a very sophisticated system. They have strong participation with their city government there, strong interest. They have, the City of Rock Hill actually runs a COC-funded program for rapid rehousing. We've been talking to city staff here to see if there would be interest and capacity to look at that here as well. The thing is, between here and Charleston, you've got one shelter, which is Samaritan House in Orangeburg. So, you do have needs across our state. You really do. What we have done in the past, we haven't done this in about a year and a half with the pandemic, is we would work with our street outreach workers to do kind of a summer survey, if you will, to kind of ask people if they saw new faces that they didn't recognize, because our street outreach workers in this community are amazing, and they know the population, they know the people. Ask them, how long they've been here and where they've come from. Typically, we find it's fairly low percentage of people. It's somewhere around 10 to 15%. Which I think is about roughly, and Colonel Curry can correct me on this, but I think that's roughly what transition sees in a year of people who are not from the Midlands in a given year. So I think that typically lines up. So I'll go through the recommendations unless Matt has a question.
No, my question relates to, I guess, in one of your response to the questions. I don't mean to be jumping ahead, but I
No,
Okay,
go for it.
She offered.
Go for
okay,
it.
since you asked. Well, I did notice when you were asked the question about, how to deal with the 200 to 250 unsheltered, and you referenced the Inclement Weather Center being closed. And, we know from the Main Street District, when that center is open, we do seem to have less people on the streets than when it's not open.
Right.
And it is by definition, a seasonal shelter and those kind of things. So I guess I'm just emphasizing that, having that low-demand facility does seem to help. And just, any thoughts on that, I guess is the
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. So the city came to us, oh gosh, six years ago or so to help coordinate the city's inclement weather center, which is the cold weather shelter. And we work with partners to do that. So we do the coordination of it and then obviously work with HMIS on the data collection side and the analysis side. So work with Transition, Salvation Army, the Comet, and then private security. Average headcount last year was 104 people. Again, you do feel that when the center is not open. Other things, just to kind of give you a snapshot of kind of the big picture of services, because you'll see in my recommendation, the first one I talk about is housing, because getting through the bottleneck is really what we need to accomplish from a systems level approach in the community. Getting people where they can increase their income and then identify housing, because housing is incredibly scarce, especially housing that people can afford. So just a couple quick things to kind of also paint the picture. So in HMIS, what we do is we track what's called system performance measures. That measures how long people are homeless in the community, so how quickly they're able to exit the homelessness system based on housing and other opportunities available to them. So in last year, we in HMIS saw 2,989, sorry, I'll say that. Oh, that's my timer. Okay, I'll be real quick. 2,989 unduplicated people. And so these are people in shelter beds, street outreach, things like that, that qualify as homeless. Beds that we have year-round is 2,081. Seasonal beds is another 269. Now, these are 13 county statistics, but 80% is Richland County. Just keep that in mind. That means you have a gap on any given day of 639 people who need housing of some sort that do not have that opportunity. So that is your housing gap. So 639 people, the difference between the number of beds that you have, including your seasonal, which are not year-round, and the number of people who were unduplicated last year. And then think about 80% of that typically is Richland County. So you have over 500 people on a given day that need housing that do not have that opportunity. And that was my 10 minutes, so.
Jennifer, can I have a follow-up to that?
Yes.
So those are very helpful numbers, and being that you all are the coordinating entity for the City of Columbia's efforts, do you have a way to break down the numbers for the city population of unsheltered?
We can. We're working on that right now. It's a little bit more complex. Sheltering facilities are easier to identify than unsheltered people because we may have an amazing agency, like, for example, 180 Place, that does street outreach here, but they also do it in Aiken. So it's a little bit more complex to understand in the system where they interacted with someone. So we want to be exact. We are looking at it, but I don't have that today.
And so I would just suggest, being that, again, the nature of the questions are, and the going forward, of course, if you all are still working with us in this space, that's a pretty important number to understand and know for us.
Yeah.
And I think it also goes to the bigger discussion about the continuum of care in this 13 counties. So a lot of that information seems, it's all mixed up, with all the continuum of care counties. And we're trying to, I know, get more micro as to what's going on here. So that would be a request that I would have. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some complexity to the way the HUD does formulas. So if you look at not to get too technical, so it's $3.5 million is the continuum of care money, correct? So if you look at how they allocate money per county, now we put it into a big pool, and typically 90% of those dollars are focused here in Richland County, specifically really in Columbia. And again, those are housing units, those are people in beds, in a safe, decent, long-term bed. If you look at the actual HUD allocations, though, Columbia is only $300,000 is what you're supposed to get. Lexington County is $1.5 million. So I would suggest potentially, as a lobbying or an advocacy effort, you can look at the HUD allocations. If you look at other surrounding states, South Carolina per capita gets far less money in the HUD continuum of care competition than comparable states. Connecticut it's a tiny state, has less homeless people than us, and gets about 10 times per person than we do here. So if you had those paid lobbyists, that would be an amazing thing for them to be talking with HUD about, is the formula itself.
So Jennifer, this is more probably of a comment than a question, but, you know, of those 500 people, so those are 500 that, you know, the question would be, of those 500, you know, how many of those are ones that is a gap after hours on who you contact, what's available, where can people go,
Right.
Those types of things. And
Yeah, it's complex. I mean, there is very limited intake after hours and weekends, but the unfortunate reality as well is our shelters are full. So even if you interacted with someone or if an officer interacted with someone, they're more likely than not, there's not going to be a bed for them to go to if there was intake available. So that's the other complexity that we have. So when I think about this, I tend to step back and say we have to take a step back and look at the systems themselves. We need more ranges of housing options for people so we can get people out of transitions or out of Oliver Gospel quicker to free up those beds for people who need those beds. You can see in my recommendations, I don't advocate for additional shelter beds. I advocate for more housing options that the system can flow faster for everyone. The average length of time people are homeless is 59 days in a shelter bed. That should be at least half. Okay.
I think that just underscores again, you know, I've had some conversations with Ms. Sutton, you know, there has to be some kind of intermediate solution too when we're involved, especially, I know we're going to have continued conversations about this crisis stabilization unit. I think that's a great option for that.
Yeah, we're absolutely an advocate, and I think it's amazing what you did adding the mental health professional to your team. That was wonderful. Yeah. Okay. I'll ask for questions, and I'll look over at the city clerk to make sure that's okay.
And if you guys think of more, we have plenty of opportunities after everybody presents as well. I think as people are presenting, there may be some other questions about. Thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your work.
I believe so. Colonel Curry? Okay. And for those of y'all that may not know, so currently the way that our inclement weather center is supported is that United Way contracts with Transitions to provide those services. And in the past, it's been Christ Central Ministries. So we've had a lot of different models to operate that seasonal shelter.
If you go ahead, first of all, thank you for having me tonight. I appreciate the chance and the opportunity to talk a little bit. If you look in your handouts, you'll see a data sheet that was sort of what I'm going to try to talk through in a very quick manner. It starts with our mission there, engaging and equipping homeless adults in the Midlands to transition into stability and permanent housing. We are about getting folks into permanent housing. That's what we want to do. We do not regard ourselves as a normal shelter. We are here to try to help people overcome barriers and to get into housing as quickly as possible. So we're a one-stop facility where people can go, and ideally partners are there, and they can get help from case managers and be able to meet their needs and then move into housing. We do have 260 beds that are available. We're at 91% occupancy, so we're pretty much full every night, especially at the lower level emergency beds. Some of the veteran beds may not be full, but we don't tend to take a person off the street and put them in the veteran rooms that we're working with the VA on. So those 260 beds, another 70 or so that walk in. So that's some of that unsheltered population. It's also some of the Oliver Gospel folks who come to us for the day. You can see we've placed 3,298 folks into permanent housing. We regard that as a major success since we've opened. 3,000 plus people walking around the streets of Columbia/Richland County/Lexington would really be a disaster. We'd start to look like LA. So we regard that as a big success. The next number there, number 6, we touch over 3,000 people a year. So this is our various case management, people in the day center, people in outreach, finding folks. We've done 2.3 million meals since we've opened. We're the largest feeding organization around. For everyone's knowledge, though, we only give meals to people at lunch if they don't have beds. Per the city agreement, we only do breakfast and dinner for those that have a bed. And that's per city guidance, not ours. You can see other things there, the different aspects that everyone can take advantage of, job searching, bathrooms, which I know are always a sore subject with many in the community. We have bathrooms available throughout the year for folks to use. The 214 outreach, we like outreach. I'm a believer in outreach. The nice thing there of the 247 people we touched with outreach, 143 of them got beds at transitions. So we're always trying to get people that we meet on the streets into housing, into the shelter beds at transitions, so we can then work with them and move them on to permanent housing. Always a good news story. Major partners there, thank all of them, Salvation Army, Cooperative Ministry, they're listed there for you to see. The VA, Richland County Bar does stuff, and I'd highlight one of your members is very helpful with the homeless court, which is also at transition. So lots of good things. Partners are key. Partners, we can't do everything. One of your questions on duplication, we don't try to do certain things. I love it when everybody comes to transitions because it helps that one-stop concept. So our doors are open. I love when partners come in. Some of COVID has hurt a little bit with some folks, congregating in congregate settings. But again, I think we're getting past some of that, and some of the volunteers as well as partners are coming back in force now. The streamlining efforts there, you can see, I think part of this partnership is streamlining the different organizations that are out there trying to help homeless folks. So reminders on what transitions is. It's not a shelter, it's not your standard shelter, and it helps people work through barriers. And aid them in recovering and getting them into permanent housing. Jobs are critical for us. 70% of our folks will need a job to pay for an apartment. What's called, the government will call that self-resolve. I mean, they're not going to go into permanent supportive housing. So jobs are critical, and we need to help people do that and get to where they need to be. The day center is great. That's a way of reaching the unsheltered population. They come in, that's 70 a day. They're coming in. We can engage them in services and try to get them in the housing and get them off the street so they move from unsheltered to sheltered. To answer the questions, you can see the different things that are listed here. One thing I would just caution folks, maintain what works. If there's a program that's working well, let's keep doing it. If you don't work on the sheltered population, they'll become unsheltered, and your unsheltered population will just get worse. So I really stress that we need some shelter beds. I'm like Jennifer, though. I don't know that we need to build tons more or any more, but they are helpful. They're part of the continuum of care, and we need to have them so that the unsheltered population, when they decide for help, can immediately get in a shelter and be helped. Outreach worker, I can't stress that enough. If you're concerned about somebody at 10 o'clock at night somewhere, well, first thing you need to get them during the day. There's a kind of a misguided notion that waking people up in a camp at 2 in the morning is really going to be productive. All you're going to do is infuriate folks, and unless you're there to close the camp, it's really not the best time to engage them. The best time to engage them is actually in the day center and try to draw them in and not actually even be in the camp. But we have folks who go out to the camp. I really think that's an important aspect, to have that outreach person, and not necessarily a coordinator, a person who's actually working with yellow shirts, with CPD, and actually has beds in their pocket so that when a yellow shirt finds somebody, they get a bed. I mean, yesterday we had CPD call, we gave the person a bed. The day before that, they found another person walking on 277, they got a bed. So I mean, and yesterday they worked through the outreach worker because that's who they know. So they called Alicia and we got the person in a bed. So that's a productive thing. Increasing education, I do think a challenge for us is defining what success is. I don't know that we're ever going to get every homeless person off the street. I'd sure love to do that. But as soon as we do that, somebody's going to show up somewhere or their house is going to burn down. So I mean, what is, the VA has used the term functional zero. There's smarter people than I that can explain that to you, but what is success? And I think if the task force helps to define that, that would be beneficial? I know you're focused on the unsheltered population, but does that mean, there's nobody on the street, we're never going to see anybody? I think some of that's a little bit unrealistic for a major urban area in America today. Maintaining the inclement weather center, the bus ticket program, very successful, a great program. It stopped cold. Now we have no funding, so that stopped as of 1 July. I'd love for that bus ticket program to resume. I think that's a very good way of helping sheltered and unsheltered folks get back to their families. And so those are some approaches for number one. Number two is services after 5. We mentioned the outreach worker. I think that would be important if you're trying to target someone. I've had complaints about somebody at a gas station at 10 o'clock at night. Hey, they're at a gas station at 10 o'clock at night, and it's several blocks away from transitions. So the only answer is to have an outreach person engage them. And the other answer is to tell the gas station to deal with people who are there. If the gas station's not happy or unhappy with the people there, then that's a police issue, or the gas station owner needs to decide, is that a problem? So part of this becomes having that outreach person to get there. I know Chief and I have talked about a police drop-off point. I'm all ears. Some cities do that. There are some safety considerations with that. Those are usually known by some more derogatory terms. If someone's inebriated, where do they go? The ideal thing is not always to take people to Alvin S. Glenn. So I'm open. I want to make sure it would be done right. Certainly folks like Kylie could help. What's legal here? What's the right way to do this? But, that can be something, especially in the non-IWC season, that facility's open and it could be used, with mats for people who were worried about, stumbling or falling. There's different ways to do things. And I'd be interested in anybody who wants to discuss that. We can certainly go further. DMH is a key element here. Folks like Mercy has great outreach, and USC Housing First, they have great outreach too. Working with mental health folks, you got to get it. And again, it's not 11 o'clock at night. It's during the day. It's when people are more open to discussion, and we work to get people off the street. So after 5, they're not a problem. They're in a healthy place, doing well. I think bathrooms, I've been through this, Columbia Cares plan. Bathrooms are an issue. I get chewed out about people going to the bathroom away from transitions. We have, obviously bathroom facilities, but those are only available to people really from 8:30 to 5. If you're part of that after population and you're not at transitions, bathrooms are a problem. And so again, I think that might be a profitable thing to look at. We had the portalets after the eclipse. I thought that was brilliant. They were never taken down. And I don't know, I'm not sure who they hurt, but they're gone now. And I know there's reasons for that, but that might be something that is worth looking at and deciding what's going on. Question number 3, our biggest challenges, affordable housing and single room occupancy units, rooms that are ADA compliant, disabled folks, ramps. One stair can be a disaster for folks, especially in a walker or in a wheelchair. So we're committed to making more of that type of unit available for the homeless and the public in general. Funding more, everybody likes to say fund more on the provider side, but I know on the city side that's not always the most popular thing. But we need to quit saying $1 million a year. Please say something else, because I've listened to that for 10 years, and it'd be nice to just change, let's say 1.1 million, because inflation's 8% this year. And so if we're staying at 1 million for 10 years, after a while, I think we need to say something else to everybody. The chronically homeless folks, they're tough to house. We work with them. Again, mental health and addiction issues, partners need to help with that. Incomes have not kept pace with the inflation for rental units, so there's problems there as well. Sex offenders is one the city controls. We do not take sex offenders per the city agreement. they're on the street after 5 because they cannot go anywhere. And it's not us. By law, state law, they are allowed to go in any shelter regardless of school location or anything. So we do not take them because we committed to the neighborhoods originally that we would not take sex offenders, and we're people of our word, and we're not going to take them unless the city comes back and says, you know, Craig, this is all messed up. You need to take them. And if that happens, I'm all ears. And I'll talk with people who are neighborhood leaders and make sure, hey, yeah, Craig, we'd rather have them at transitions than in our backyard, and then maybe we can do something. I think that's an easy fix that, I don't see a counter to that, really. To streamline the service, the final question here, I'm trying to get there before that beeper goes off. We've got partnering with 50 agencies. I'll partner with anybody, as long as we're doing moral and good things. I love when we partner. Hospitals, when I get those hospitals back in, some of them kind of took off. They need to come back. They want to reduce emergency room visits. Then, you need to be working with shelters, especially transitions, and we can try to work to reduce ambulance calls, because I know we have ambulance calls. I see the ambulance. So there's, that the educating the public that, there are 100 agencies. I'd like to see that list, but, they do different things. And like Lilaana's folks with families, we don't necessarily work with some of those partners. So we're single adults, 18 and older. So men and women. So some of the groups are that plentiful because there are different aspects. Some do mental health, some do substance. And that's good. This is a team sport. We're not going to shrink this to 3 people. It's going to be a lot of folks because there's a lot to this problem, and we need to work together to get there. Final thing, avoid duplication. Hey, we do that the best we can. I don't want to do something that another agency's doing well. I just want them to come over to transitions and help there, doing what their expertise is. I think I made it before the beeper. So now it's question time. Please go ahead and I'll do the best I can to answer questions.
Colonel, I got a couple really more to spark just your comments so people can understand a couple of things. So on the sex offender issue,
Okay.
how many, what's the number look like for how many people you're turning away that you confirm?
It would be very, very small. I mean, we
Right.
check, per the city guidance, we check for sex offenders when they come. We check the county state list and the national registry to make sure that they're not a sex offender. And that's only to be a resident to get a bed.
Right.
So we'll help them during the day, but again, if we're looking at 5 o'clock, it's bye-bye. Because I don't even have an answer and I don't even know where to send them.
But point being, it's a small number.
It's a small number, but it's a number. So again, you're going to eat this elephant a bite at a time. We're not going to swallow it whole. And I know neighborhoods had concern about criminals, but we can take a murderer at transitions, a former murderer, but we can't take a sex offender.
Right. And it's a pretty broad brush.
And it is, and some of those charges are kind of, we could talk to the lawyers, and somebody, did something with a 16-year-old and they were 17 or whatever, or, that kind of thing, or 18 and 17. And so I'm not defending the action, certainly, because it is abhorrent, but I do think we need to look at it and decide, is this really what the city, because we don't take them now because the city tells us not to.
Understood. So, and then the next thing that's a little bit connected to that would be, what causes someone to be banned from the facility, and how often does that happen, and can you ever get unbanned from coming back?
You can get unbanned. Bans are different. What causes it is a discipline infraction that's threatening to staff or clients. So if I say I'm going to kill you, we generally, I have to, the staff, they're not, bulletproof. They get scared, and sometimes people have to go. We try to minimize that. It's not the ideal, but we find that we're going to have to occasionally we have to do that. Can they come back? Yes. They come back by talking to Kamisha, the program director, and saying, hey, I've changed my ways. I really want to come back. And generally, we will let them back in.
Okay, so there's a process for that.
There is a process to come back in. And certainly if somebody speaks on their behalf, they're almost back immediately. If they go to another provider and, hey, they're working now, they're fighting their addiction issues, they're doing much better, hey, we're all ears.
And then last, could you speak to the bus ticket program or the reunification program and
The bus ticket was done by our outreach folks, so some of those people didn't even come to transitions. It was done with the contract through United Way to get the tickets. We worked with CPD because they would often call our outreach person and say, hey, I got 3 people over here. Can you come talk to them? They have to have, the case manager has to talk to a relative or close friend who agrees on the phone that they will take them in, help them get a job, and help support them. So where ideally we don't do cold sends where we're sending someone to Montana for no reason. We're not going to do that. Somebody's got to, at the other end, at that address, has to say, we're going to take them in.
Yeah, would you mind coming to a mic? 'Cause there's
Yeah, come on, get up here, Jennifer. Speak into this.
Sorry. So we do track the data on the bus tickets through HMIS, and we track returns. And Colonel staff tells us where they're going and things like that. And obviously, you have to verify supportiveness on the location. So 25 bus tickets last year. We started a little bit late in the contract, so they missed about 2 or 3 months of the services. So it was a little bit lower than the previous year, which was 47. So 25 tickets, typically about half are in-state, half are out-of-state. And we have about a 15% return rate on average, is really, because we track over time people who show back up into HMIS locally. And keep in mind, we can track statewide. So it is a statewide HMIS system. We manage our portion, but we can look to see if they've gone to Greenville or, and then if they show back up in the Midlands, we can track that here. So it's about a 15% return rate. We think it's a great program that we would encourage you to continue, so.
Yeah, I bring that up. I'm a big believer in it. I think it's, reunified a lot of people with loved ones. And again, the criteria for purchasing a ticket and putting somebody on a bus is very responsible. We're not, forcing them on the bus and sending them against their will. It's with the purpose, and I think it has a lot of value.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Colonel, I have a question.
Please.
As far as the beds, I know 260 beds, how are they delineated between men and women? How many beds do you have?
We're about 70-30 on that, so there are more male beds than female. If we were 50-50, we would not fill all of our women's beds. So we don't do that to be mean. That's what the population is. So that's about 70-30 is a good thing to write down there.
Real quick, so you mentioned this, but you do not take sex offenders, homeless sex offenders into your facility. Are you aware of anybody that does?
No.
Nobody in Columbia?
No, and some of that's, federal guidelines are very strict against sex offenders.
I understand.
So-
And would you imagine, you say you don't deal with very many of them, but perhaps they know they can't get into the facility, so they wouldn't interact with you at all, perhaps?
Well, they come in for the day, so we
Gotcha.
do help them. I've had sex offenders walk up to me and, can I please have a bed? I don't know where I'm going tonight. And I'm saying, well, I'm sorry, you can't have a bed.
And then just, in the entertainment districts, one thing we really see is the problematic homeless are very resistant to any kind of housing or any kind of assistance. It sounds like you have the same issues in your facility with some folks that you have to ban. Where do those people go? If I'm banned from transitions or any of the other facilities, what's my alternative at that point?
Well, they're only banned from us, and they're not banned from the IWC. So in the winter, they do have a place to go. We ban no one from the IWC. We might put a person out for the night, but, unless they threaten to kill a bunch of people, then we usually we do a timeout for 1 or 2 days. So the IWC is about as low barrier as you can get. Where they can go, they could try Oliver Gospel. It's easier to get into transitions than Oliver Gospel, much easier. So I think Travis he would agree with that comment. But there are stipulations. We could take, our federal funding is such that the federal government's now trying to reverse its course because they realize from several years ago they were very strict on sex offenders. Now they realize, well, they really can't go anywhere. So they're changing some of their guidance. So they can go somewhere. We can get them in.
last thing, I'll keep this very brief, I'm sorry if do you communicate with Oliver Gospel, for example, about this, we have a person who's a problem, and do you guys have any kind of record or database of people, or is kind of, each place has their own sort of issues?
But usually Travis calls me directly and just says, hey, I've got this guy. Our people, our troublemakers really don't go to Oliver Gospel. It's the other way around. Their folks will come our way. Yeah, and again, it's just, they're selective and they have their mission and they're doing their way, and I'm not critical of that, but it is harder. The alcohol screening and such is much harder to get in there. If you blow anything, you're not going to get a bed there. So, I mean, that's just, talk to Travis. But we do talk to each other, and we have talked about people. We've tried to figure out some of the hardest folks. We've tried to figure out and help each other on what do we do with this person? Where can they go? Come on, Liliana. There's a group party up here. Just he's talking.
As the colonel said, we don't work together because we deal with families, and I'm laughing going, but 2 weeks ago, as we had a situation at one of our shelters, it involved a single female who had been at transitions, who had been banned due to violent behavior, who had children that had been removed from her custody. So at the time, she fit transitions. She then found her way to us. Because of HMIS, after the fact, we were able to track the violent behavior and tie it to mental illness at the time because we could go in and make the case notes. So our worlds do collide at times, and it is HMIS that will tie us. And the fact that I immediately picked up my phone and called Craig and said, what the heck? So there's formal and informal relationships at play.
I have Liliana on speed dial, so we work through
Colonel,
that. Please.
As a practical matter, if you would explain to everyone here, as far as getting a bed, how long they can, well, not how long they can stay, but are they free to leave once they have a bed? Do you lock them in for the night?
Okay.
How does that work?
Okay, so we're not a prison. We can't lock anybody anywhere. They generally, the way you get a bed is you walk in and ask for a bed right at the day center. That's the most common. People walk in off the streets, that unsheltered population. And partners will also send us an email, and Lynn Allen is our intake person who the city helps to fund. She knows like almost most of the homeless people in the city. And again, she'll work, get them in a bed through partners. So again, we don't have a wait list per se. Every day is a decision on, okay, what's going on. We will look at things like how many times they've been there. So if they've been there multiple times, we might take a person who hasn't been there multiple times. Because after a while, we start to say, well, what's your commitment here? And once they get in, then you ask for 30 days, they can be in the emergency beds. If they prove that they want to stay and go up in the program, that's great. That's where Jennifer gets the 59-day number. But generally, they go into program and then they self-fulfill. If they want to do well, they stay and it gets better and they go up, or they may leave. They're free to leave whenever they want. We can't stop them.
I just have 2 quick comments followed by 2 questions. I want to echo the support of the bus ticket program. That's a program that we have referred to y'all a lot, especially for folks living institutionalized settings. A lot of times they will be transported to Columbia for a state hospital or a state incarceration facility, and then that release does not include transportation back home, wherever that may be. And so we rely on that program a lot to reconnect families after they've either been released from a hospital or other institutionalized setting. So just wanted to echo my support. It's also something that we've used to try and help folks individually who are on the registry get to a program that will allow for housing. There is one in Charleston. But I'm hoping that that bus ticket program comes back. I think that it not being there is unfortunate. And I also just wanted to discuss a little bit about how an individual who has been banned from transitions, like Hugh said, can obviously appeal that or request that their ban be lifted, and that's something that we do often. If someone's re-engaging in services or there's been a change in circumstances, we will ask for that, and Transitions is very open to that conversation. So just appreciate y'all's transparency and ability to work with us. Going into questions, I think my two questions are, one would be, if you could talk a little bit about the limitations y'all have on providing beds for folks who are leaving institutionalized settings that have been there for more than 90 days, and if there's any kind of HUD limitation on the definition of homelessness. For instance, if someone's been in jail for more than 90 days, why wouldn't they then be able to go directly towards the bed at Transitions? That's my, you want me to go one by one, or?
Let's do that. My IQ is not that high. So when you deal with the prison system, we are not supposed to be their default solution to like, okay, you've been here for 5 years, and now you're just going to send you to the homeless center. So hopefully their preparatory phase to get people housed is much better than that. So we're not supposed to coordinate directly with the prison. And that sort of causes usually that day of somebody, you know, who really has no place to go out of jail. They kind of wander around, and then, you know, we're like, come on. You know, so yes, there is a prohibition, and that's from the federal government, actually. So we can't overcome that. We have to adhere to that. And that's why we don't work closely with prisons, although I've sure talked to prisons a lot. But we're not there saying, have them here on Thursday. Okay, that's not what we're supposed to do. The prison's supposed to do better than that.
And just talking about not supposed to work that way, do you guys often still sometimes see folks being dropped off expecting a bed because there hasn't been case management prior to their release from either an incarcerative setting or a hospital? Is that something you still experience?
Well, hospitals, yeah, so yesterday, you know, one of Chief's great majors gets a hospital guy going up 277 in his hospital garb and a walker. And he'd been in a car wreck, and so he's walking up 277 trying to walk to Charleston. So, you know, there's a lot of problems there. And Major White, and I can say his name, Major White did a great job. He got him to Transitions with his other officer, and we helped the guy out. So I don't know the preparation for him to leave the hospital. We were looking, he was discharged properly. Not quite sure why he was in the hospital garb, but, you know, he was there. So some of that sometimes isn't as good with the hospital. The jails, yeah, we've got folks, and I'm not here to badmouth prisons, but, you know, there's a lot of ex-offenders at Transitions.
I'll badmouth the prisons for you, it's all right.
So, no, but I'm not, you know, they work hard and they try to do the best they can, but they don't always get people housed the day they leave the jail.
And then my last just question would be, why would lifting the limitation on how, like, having beds for folks on the registry be helpful to providing them services that could result in housing?
Well, I think the problem here is the one of where do sex offenders go if they're homeless? And I can't answer that, but apparently you think there's a place in Charleston. So next time I'm going to tell that to a person. I say, you should go to Charleston. And then I'm just going to look at them. And maybe, I don't know if we can call that place and get a bed for them. We'll actually use a bus ticket, I guess, if it comes back, and that might solve the problem. That seems very cumbersome and not, I mean, again, I can take a murderer, but I can't take a sex offender. And that sex offender is going to sleep in the neighborhood's backyard. And I don't know, I'm not sure we're benefiting there as a society. I want to help people. So that just seems like a hindrance that I don't know what we're gaining from that, to be honest with you.
Colonel, let me ask you one last question.
Okay.
You know, Transitions is an important destination for persons in need, and those operations cost money. You, as all our wonderful nonprofit partners, work hard for contributions. As far as county and municipality funding, outside of what the City of Columbia line items or gives you, provides for you, what percentage of other counties, municipalities does your total budget come from?
Depending on how you count Lexington, we get CDBG money from them. which is actually federal dollars, but they have funded us every year out of their CDBG funding.
Do you know off the top of your head how much that is?
Oh, boy. Okay, so this is going to get, I think it's.
It's okay if it- if
it's
it's an
about
estimate.
60,000, I think now. It was 50, it might be in the 50s. It's in that neighborhood. There's some COVID money that was in there last year that came out of Lexington. And then Richland County tends to be 200. They cut us 100 this year. So and I'm not happy about that. You want to do something, go talk to Richland County. And I don't know, I mean, we are 54% Richland County. It's the largest county by far. The next county is Lexington. It's about 15%. Orangeburg is the next county after that. So we were talking about folks coming from down south. They're only like 1%. But again, I mean, that infuriated me, and it was done. And, you know, we're now trying to recover from that cut. Casey gives us money. West Columbia gives us money. So they're part of Lexington. They also count the hospital.
Is that number under Lexington, Casey and West Columbia?
I'm sorry.
Is the Casey and West Columbia allocations fall under that 50-ish thousand of Lexington?
No, separate pot of money. And then Fairfield County gives us money. They give us a little bit. They don't have a lot of money, but I go up there every year and talk to them. And that's most of the other, I think I've hit most of the other. Blythewood gives us money.
Wonderful.
So we try our best. I mean, again, part of the issue is that Transitions is in Columbia, so I think some of them are like, okie doke. But they do acknowledge that their folks go to
You are an
Transitions.
important destination for the Midlands.
Yeah, we're helping everybody from all over the place.
Thank you so much.
Okay? I think I'm done. I didn't hear the beeper, so, thank you. Thanks for what you guys do,
Sure.
too.
One last question, I'm sorry.
One last.
Whoops.
Sorry. Just like to start by acknowledging and thanking you and Kristen and Jennifer for joining our coalition of downtown meetings every month. I think that's been a real helpful channel of communication to have open, given our proximity. And so I think the issues and concerns in the neighborhoods are well understood. And we found that the outreach worker that you had and the position was unfortunately lost was very helpful. It's something we started sharing with our neighborhoods, within the last year. Because we often found that our neighbors were reluctant to call the police because it wasn't necessarily a police matter, but they had a concern for an individual or for something going on. So I think that's something we would like to see included somehow, so that there is an option to get somebody help, when it's not necessarily a police matter. So, short of that, one of the questions is, we see a lot of loitering, especially on the edge of the neighborhood. What is Transitions policy for loitering, on your immediate property, maybe immediately surrounding area, and how do you manage that?
Okay, good question. So we have the police signs up that you're not supposed to loiter. We don't want people to loiter at all. We want them to come in. So unlike other places where we say, get out of here, our actual answer during the day is to come in. At night, that's harder. They can't come in because we're full. And, at night, we don't the day center closes at 5 o'clock. So after that, the guards will tell them, hey, you need to move on. We have cameras around the perimeter, and the guards do it. And I'm often on the way home, I'll call, say, hey, there's a guy hanging out here at the bus stop. Go tell him that, he's been there all day, so I'm not sure he's getting on the bus. Or other people are by the gate. So the guards on Transitions try to tell people to move on. I welcome yellow shirt presence, police presence. We don't want people out there. Often they're selling drugs. I mean, they're preying on the homeless people. They're not helping the situation. So, they need to go somewhere else. I'm with you. We try to get them gone, and generally we do, but, if you drive by the place and see 5 people standing somewhere, I mean, it's a big place. It's a big city block.
Thank you.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you. Kristen.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. You ready for it? Yes. Okay. My name's Kristen Connors. I'm from USC and Prisma Health Housing First program. I am going to start talking about Housing First as a model and a strategy. It is permanent supportive housing, which means, as the name suggests, we take people directly from the street, people who are experiencing homelessness. We take them from the street or from shelters and put them directly into housing. We also provide wraparound supportive services, which include case management, mental health counseling, and medical adherence. As far as Columbia and how it has kind of evolved for our program, you'll see the history and summary of services that I submitted. Back in 2008, it began here as a pilot program. It was funded by the city in partnership with Supportive Housing and the Columbia Housing Authority. At that time, the city committed to funding both the services and the housing units, which included the rent and utilities. And I think that meant that we housed 15 clients at that time. I don't have that information in front of me, but what happens is we start identifying a small group at a time and move them directly from the streets, put them into housing. In 2012, we had a program expansion that included 4 family units, and then we also included what's called HOPWA units, which stands for Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, which is HUD funding, which we also have a HOPWA program in our office as well. So we're really trying to diversify the funding, which is something that your task force mentions a lot. Also, around 2012, the Columbia Housing Authority received HUD funding to fund their own rental and utility subsidies for the units so that the city general fund dollars were only responsible for the supportive services, which is different than how it started. So, since the program's inception, we have housed 157 clients through the Housing First program. These clients are historically difficult to engage, which is something that your task force also talks a lot about. They are typically very resistant to services, and they are usually chronically homeless. All of our clients are living with disabling conditions, including mental illness, addiction, and physical disabilities. Any questions so far? So we also track through our data where our clients are discharged from. Because it's permanent housing, people can technically stay forever, obviously, but we do like to move people out of the units once they're able to kind of free up spaces for people to move off of the streets. We have had 120 discharges since we've started the program, and 72 of those have moved on to other permanent housing. The most important thing, I think, for the task force to know is that this approach is extremely cost-effective. We have provided services for $24, approximately $24 per client per day. So Housing First is really identified as a best practice because it's cheaper than jails, cheaper than shelters, cheaper than hospitals, which, as we've identified, are typically where these clients end up. I also wanted to mention that the Supportive Housing Office has an outreach worker, which the city dollars that come from the general fund, we fund part of an outreach worker through this program, and that is something that I think all of the responses have identified as a need to really get engagement for the population that we see on the streets. I just left, actually, a meeting, it was at 2 o'clock right before here, and a lot of outreach workers from agencies have come together they share information, they identify clients and areas that are very much, clients that are in need and areas that could use attention. And I think that it's a great way for people to work together. I don't know necessarily that the task force knows that these conversations are happening. And so I did want to make sure that we pointed that out. HMIS is the database, a couple of us have mentioned it so far, and the conversations were happening in real time. People had like a tablet, they were looking up client information, they were saying, here's the last contact, here's the agency who had made the contact. There was a member from CPD who was there. So it was a very cool experience, and I just wanted to point that out. As far as challenges in the work, I think housing. We need housing. We need housing here. People who we work with have a lot of barriers to housing. Their history, affordability, criminal history, eviction history, their credit history. People get vouchers, which are supposed to make housing affordable, and then the housing's not available. So we see that a lot, and that's very unfortunate. Another thing I wanted to mention was I hate it when we identify somebody and they decline services, whether it's a shelter bed, whether it's case management, counseling, housing, things like that. I think that happens all the time. I think outreach workers specifically can identify with that, and that's discouraging, it's concerning, and my response to that would be that people who are experiencing homelessness don't necessarily trust the system. They've been disappointed a lot, and we have to keep trying. That's not necessarily an excuse to say, oh, they don't want help, and then we turn away. I think that we just keep trying and we keep attempting to engage, and you never know who the right person will be or the right time, and you just keep trying is what I would say to that. So a lot of my responses, which I thought was really interesting, mirrored very much what Jennifer and Craig said. And so I think that's a great example of how we do collaborate and we do work together, and we are very much on the same page, which I think is important. Did you want to say
Speaking
something?
of collaborate, I see you with Prisma.
Yes.
Do you collaborate with any other departments, functions at Prisma, gathering data from ER for visits to log into the database? What kind of energy is over there at Prisma towards looking forward, participating and helping us, this group move forward?
That's a good question. We have before. There was a study done before, research, specifically a research study on, it was ER diversion, actually. So people who were brought into the Housing First program, this was back when it very first started, and it was pre-housing, post-housing, and was there any difference in the ER visits? As far as currently, we have access to the electronic medical record. So we can look at and see if our clients are in any of the Prisma, systems that way. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think in general, moving forward, if we have wonderful health care in our communities, whether it's Prisma, MUSC,
Yes.
Lexington Medical's footprint's
Yep.
growing, for them to help us along, possibly in revenue, participation, but also with that data collection would be
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. And now that everything is all integrated, you know, Prisma has access to other health systems that are merged with our EMR as well, so.
Perfect, thank you.
Other questions regarding Housing First?
Yeah, City Manager Wilson?
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. This question may be more best answered by all of our providers. A lot of reference continues to be made about the outreach workers and the need for more. So what is the going rate for an outreach worker?
Oh, I don't want to say that publicly.
Is it a secret? I'm just curious so that we can, if this is something that
Contingent on
continues to be.
experience,
Okay.
education and experience. I mean, right, like.
Okay. And then regarding with some finality, clarity, please, on that. And I don't, again, I'm not sure if that's for you, Kristen, but I know you're involved with Prisma, so that was why I was asking the question. Yes, ma'am.
We are currently in the process of, we're in the, kind of the licensure phases of it. So DHEC is working with us on the licensure portion of it. We had to hire an architect. So they're looking at the facility that we have identified that is going to be off of Park Lane. And so they're looking at that facility now to kind of make sure it's up to code. But we're working closely and trying to work as quickly as we can to get it open.
Can you explain for the benefit of everyone here what the purpose would be? I know that the one has been stood up for a while in the Low Country.
Yeah.
Seems to be a missing link here in the Midlands.
Yeah, so it's for the Richland and Lexington County. It's going to be a unlocked 8-bed unit for anyone who, of course, meets the criteria for crisis, psychosis, suicidal ideation, you guys get crisis. So it'll basically be those folks that come in. We'll have staff around the clock. Again, 8 beds. They have a maximum of 14 days, so they can do a 14-day stay, and it will be unlocked.
If there was the capacity to do more beds with partnerships, with funding that the city might have or other entities for non-congregate housing, is that something where the center could be expanded upon so that it's more than 8 beds?
I think, well, I'll say this. I will say location and finding an appropriate facility has been a barrier. And so in trying to find an appropriate facility, right now, 8 beds is where we are.
Thank you.
Dr.
I had a
Cruz?
question.
Yes.
So the cost data was really helpful and interesting to see. It's been a while since I've read some national studies about Housing First, but it's similar in other cities. Do you know
Yes.
how many Housing First programs are in the U.S. right now?
The U.S., no. Do you know? Does anybody know?
Well, last I checked, it was over 100, but it's
Oh,
also
yeah. It's replicated nationally. It's replicated internationally as well.
Canada and European Union has a large study related to it. But when you say it's evidence-based practice, you're referring to the success in many different cities and the
Yes, I
cost
can
effectiveness
find
data
out.
being replicated in many different cities.
Yes, I can find out and get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
And just kind of bouncing off of that cost effectiveness, I think, just to compare, you stated that it was more cost effective than jail, and I believe that it's about $91 or $92 a day per person for the jail funding. So just comparing that to your around 25. My backup question, or the question that I had is my understanding is right now housing is particularly difficult.
Particularly, yes.
Would you be able to kind of highlight the specific difficulties that we're facing? Like, what is it right now that could be contributing to this perception of increased numbers? And what about that is specific to the housing issues?
Like, why is housing so difficult to obtain for our program specifically?
Either that or just specifically right now, like what about the housing environment is making it, is it different now?
Rents are going up?
Than it has been?
Rents are going up, yes. We used to have what I would consider good relationships with entire apartment complexes, right? Or private landlords. And the whole complex is being bought by what seems like out-of-state companies. And so when we used to have like a personal relationship, like, oh, hey, Joe, can we have 3 units? Sure, no problem. And it was a personal attachment, a personal relationship. They were committed to our cause. No, now call somebody, way across the country. And they stopped accepting HUD vouchers. They stopped being lenient with background checks, things like that. And so there went 3 or 6 or 10 units that we used to have access to, times 4 apartment complexes. So we're just having a very hard time. That's just our program. Then we have other clients and other programs who are getting vouchers that they're not able to use. Then we're just having other clients without vouchers who can't find any housing whatsoever. So the housing market's hard right now, which causes more people to experience potentially homelessness.
Thank you. We
You're welcome.
appreciate it. So now we'll move into hearing from our 2 community development, or you hear the term CDBG a lot. I know there's a lot of acronyms, and I want to make it accessible for everyone. And that is Homeless No More and Mercy. And so I'll have maybe Homeless No More, Lilana, come up first, and then we'll have Mercy close us out. Again, these are folks that are working with our community development funds.
Good evening, good afternoon. I was joking, if Craig gets called Colonel, I get called Doctor, FYI. I am Lila Anna Sauls, and I am President and CEO of Homeless No More. And I am probably the only service provider here who does not work with chronic men and women. So heads up on that. Erica, how do you want to work the PowerPoint? Okay, so my apologies, but yeah. Okay, all right, so just so you have an overview of what we do. We are a system of care for homeless families, and that is defined as parents, grandparents, single father, single mother with a child 17 or under in their custody. So it can be multi-generational, it can be a father with 3 children, it can be a grandparent, an adult child, and children in their custody. We have 4 primary programs. Family shelter, which is emergency services, that is a campus, 30 days. St. Lawrence Place, another campus, that is transitional housing, that is up to 2 years with intensive case management and life skill programming. Live Oak Place, which is straight landlord-tenant affordable housing. And then our 4th pillar, as we call it, is advocacy. You're going to hear us talk a lot about systems and the fact that we can proactively change a lot in our community and in our state if we attack those systems first. Just some figures for you. Last year, we served 900 parents and children. 96% of our families, when given support services and programs, exited to permanent housing. Additionally, of the families that we did not serve, we were able to refer. So about 500 calls. You will hear me talk about HMIS over and over and over. We track everything in HMIS. When someone calls our front office, we put you into HMIS. So at any time, any funder can ask me for data, I can pull it. We are the only shelter system that serves fathers and boys over the age of 12. Any questions on our system of care? Okay. I'm going to jump into your 4 questions. If I can get the mouse to work. Aha. Question 1. What are your recommendations for addressing the growing number of unsheltered homeless on the street? I'm going to be the only person here today who's going to say, I don't know, because I don't work with this population. And Skip and I go back and forth because we've been partners in crime forever about this. Here's who I can tell you we do work with. The families that city police officers find in the Walmart parking lot in a car. Our families are the hidden homeless. They're not going to show up on Main Street. They're not going to show up in an entertainment district, primarily because they are scared of losing their children. We talk about a data disconnect. Any of the counts you see, I often laugh and I'll say, oh, there's this great point in time count that says there's 160 families in X number of counties. Well, that's great, but on any one given night, I have 65 in my care. Or Richland 1 and Richland 2 have 1,100 homeless children. Do the math. There's a data connect when it comes to families. Again, our focus is taking care of that population. And here's how we do it. Our system of care is designed to meet them where they are. So if they're coming in from a car and they don't have copies of their ID, which means they can't get a job and their kids can't go to school yesterday, which was the first day of school, our job is making sure that's what we do in those first 30 days. Then we work on how much are they making. Then we work on, do they know how to budget? Then we work on, do they have ABC vouchers for childcare? We have to meet those families where they are. Again, the referral center is huge. As I called Craig out about how often we're calling each other at night even. We run wide, not deep. If we see mental illness, we're going to call Mercy. If we see domestic violence, we're going to call Sister Care. We have a professional team of social workers, but they are resource connectors. So we will very quickly outsource to other agencies that run deep. And I may have just gone backwards. Erica, you know me better than this. All right, so the question number 2, lack of coordination in services after 5. What would you suggest how we should address this? Skip, I'm just going to keep calling you out. So this came into play with us 5 years ago. And it came into play as the police officers were basically finding families in the Walmart parking lot and were putting them up in motels out of their own pocket. And I just am bad at this. So what we did is we created a temporary motel voucher program. And the inherent challenges. At that time, we received $7,000. It was a pass-through grant through the United Way, I believe, Jennifer. And it came from the city. And it worked that if a city police officer found a family in immediate need in that parked car, they knew the motels. They put the family in that motel. We sent a social worker out the next day who worked with that family to then come into the shelter system. $7,000 lasted about 6 weeks. And once word got out, what we found was families were actually looking to be placed into the motels. We ran out of $7,000. COVID hit. We went back to the city in emergency funding. We got $10,000. We used it for overflow with family shelter. So again, we were running at capacity at family shelter. We weren't going to have anyone graduate from the program onto the streets. So we used it for the families that were now being displaced because of COVID. We found they didn't want to come into the shelter once we would have a vacancy open up. HMIS, we're tracking the data. We ran through the 10,000. Fast forward, rental moratorium was lifted, and we did not call it a wave of evictions. We called it a tsunami. So this past fall, we applied and received $75,000 in emergency motel funding. Same thing. We would put the families in motels. They would not come into the shelters. So we started crunching the numbers, and we realized that you could put a family in a hotel for 2 nights. After 2 nights, they would no longer come into what we call the system. At that point, they had grown accustomed to a no barrier, no rule lifestyle, and they would decline services, or they would go to another agency that was also doing the same motel voucher program. Internally, we decided we were going to limit ourselves to 48 hours. We did. 89% of those families now come into the shelter system. 2 nights. In addition to that, that is what our CDBG funding goes towards. We received $25,000 from the City of Columbia, and it is specifically for a motel voucher program. We estimate we can serve 20 families. We have contracts with 6 motels located throughout the city because our goal is to keep the families close to where the children are in school. Our second recommendation, the small city outreach team that can assess and refer quickly. But I take it a step farther. It's not just outreach, it's social workers. So these are 2 terms, and they are not interchangeable. Street outreach is the team that is working with the homeless who are on the street. You heard Craig talk about at midnight versus during the day. A social worker is the person who follows them. You need both. And I know this because we don't have outreach workers. We only have social workers. And I put the success of our programs on the social workers. The last one is continued use of HMIS and data tracking. You have heard us use HMIS over and over and over. Every organization that receives federal funding is using HMIS. We have staff who has to use it. They're trained in it. We can pull any data point that you need. Here we go. Biggest challenges of the work. You cannot have this conversation without talking about the need for affordable housing in this city. Average market rent is $1,100. Self-sustainability index shows that a family with 2 children has to make $60,000 to keep their head above water if they have children in daycare. That is data. My families, chronically homeless men and women who are coming out of transitions, are not making that. We need to develop affordable housing at 30 to 50% average market income, which means it's landlord-tenant, they're paying rent, and you can have supportive services included. Jennifer talks about the McKinsey Scott money. Our third pillar with Live Oak Place will have 200 units within the next 12 months. We're watching it work with the families. But their number one life skill that's lacking is budgeting. So even if they're securing a landlord-tenant lease, because of the moratorium, because of where we've been for the past 3 years, they're still having issues with paying that rent. And we just kind of had the best of both worlds because we know the programs and the services. And our third, right now, it's the changing post-COVID environment. Dr. Klutz and I were having this conversation. This is not specific to the homeless population. The families we're serving are more transient. They do not want rules. and they are more willing to walk out because of rules. Now, we are a place of rules. We have always been a place of rules. But that means, I think, someone asked earlier, so where do they go? That's a really good question. But if the person who held me hostage for 45 minutes until I got to a phone and texted my friend at the police department, comes back, she's not going to have housing with me. Where do they go? Because right now, they are not looking for rules. But I would offer that's not specific to the homeless population. I think right now, society in general is trying to deal with this post-COVID environment. Four, coordination of services. When Craig jokes about having me on speed dial, we're really on speed dial for each other. I actually texted Mac with Mercy before I texted Melron that day. We meet through the mock. Formally, we have HMIS. We have the round table at Homeless No More, where we pull about 100 total service providers together over the past couple of years, and it ranges from the nonprofits to the school districts to the church groups, and we talk about what's affecting the families we serve. So it could be education, it could be transportation, it could be childcare. The one thing we do not talk about is funding. And we call it the round table after King Arthur, because no one's in charge. We call the meeting, and we remind everybody at the beginning of every meeting, we're not going to talk about money, because that tends to put you in a competitive mindset. And what we find is that it's this safe space to talk about the issues those we serve are facing. The biggest challenge. We never went home. I don't know about y'all. We were essential employees. I have 5 children. They homeschooled themselves. They fed themselves. We never expelled the first family. Right now, I have people ghosting me for interviews. We never went home. So when you ask, the number one challenge for the service providers is doing more, just like you, with less, with teams that are mentally fried. We're tired. But here's the deal. We're not going home. There's work to be done. And we're going to keep doing it. But there's only one way to keep doing the work. It's to have us as part of the conversation. Because there are not 100 organizations. I'm listed 4 times, and Live Oak Place is not transitional housing. And no one asked me. We're a best practice. We present internationally. At some point, you have to start listening to those of us on the ground about this, because we will help you solve this. I promise, because we want to go home, y'all. Any questions? Did I miss anything, Skip? Since you and I have been having this conversation in parking lots for 6 years.
And I've been hearing a lot about the research workers out on the street. What are their hours of operation?
We're staffed 24/7. We bring security in at 8.
And that's for your group?
So for my organization, so our campuses are different. Family shelter, because we allow men and boys over 12, we have security, and we have cameras everywhere because we're a dorm style. So security comes in at 7. My staff leaves at 7. We have full-time positions for weekend staff members. We can't fill them right now. So if you call the number, you will get a security guard. But we run at capacity, so if you were to call on a Saturday, they're going to tell you we're full, which was why we created the motel vouchers. And I get that phone call.
And you said that there are some families, they do their 2 days,
Mhm.
and they're out.
Mhm.
Because they're not willing to come in. And based off of the information, you're saying that it's a trust issue. So what is your group doing to try to gain this trust? Because that's a lot of money to put into a hotel for 2 days, just to get them off the street, only for them to go right back to where they came.
So right now, it's incredibly interesting. There are Oscar-nominated documentaries on this subculture. There are a lot of organizations who do not use HMIS. We've tried, pulling them into shelters. Well, we try pulling them into this mindset of data collection. So they don't track the data. And what we have found is that this subculture of motel families know how to go from organization to organization, and they sustain this lifestyle. I was speaking at a conference talking about it, and somebody threw up their hand in the back and said, I did it for a year. And it's, in their mind, they just know where to go. Whereas with HMIS, I call it a sandbox. You can kind of see the footprints. Because ultimately what we want to do is, like with the person that we were talking about, it's not funny anymore, the person that had been banned at transitions, we could tell by the 3rd time she needed mental health counseling. So if we could track those families, we could see the services they needed. But because they're going to organizations that don't participate in HMIS, or we call it flying under the radar, we never can see what services they're getting. Because at some point, we're going to say, you need St. Lawrence Place where you get intensive case management. You need more than temporary help.
Okay. I noticed you also said, well, we have social workers.
Mhm.
Are these social workers trained enough to see this when they speak to a person?
My social workers are licensed. My social workers have backgrounds from everywhere, from DSS to school districts. They run the gamut. Our social workers come from, they're all trained in interviewing. They're trained in trauma-informed care. We're very big on meeting families where they are. Because most of the time there's trauma, or what they call ACEs. So you have an ACE score, and that is in direct relation to how you deal with everything. Resiliency. So when you were asking Ms. Wilson how much an outreach worker costs, you get what you pay for. I have a professional team for that very reason.
So that outreach team is your team? That has
No,
nothing to
I
with-
do not have an outreach team. I have social workers.
Okay, so you have
Yes.
the social workers. Who has the outreach team?
Our programs look differently.
So in the
now-
interest of time,
Yes.
really quickly, because we have one more group that wants to present, I'd like to ask the task force, because we started about 7 minutes late, would you all be okay with hanging on 7 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes, so that Mercy gets enough time? Because I know that this is a really rich discussion. And would that be okay with you all? I'm sorry that we're a little behind. Okay.
Does that make sense? So different programs call for different.
I'll talk to them outside of the meeting.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes to what Craig was saying about, waking somebody up in the middle of the night is not the time to have a conversation. Our families look, act, feel different than the chronic male or female on Main Street. They present differently. Even the ones you find in the cars at Walmart. When we send the social workers, once a city police officer puts them in the motel, it looks and feels differently.
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, what is the, I don't know if this is the same terminology you use, but what is the conversion rate between the phases of your program?
That's a good question. It's actually not very high because you can stay at family shelter for 30 days and you can stay at St. Lawrence Place for 2 years. So turnover is not as high at St. Lawrence Place. Our goal at family shelter is to reunify with family, get them stable again. The national average is about 48%. Ours is about 58%. Our goal is to stabilize. St. Lawrence Place is where we dig deep with the life skills. Average length of stay prior to COVID was 13 months. And we do have the wraparound services. We have a full after-school program. We have summer camp programming. We have education liaisons. Our goal is once those families graduate from St. Lawrence Place, they don't need us anymore. They know how to maneuver an IEP.
And a
Last
quick-
question,
yeah, a quick
really.
question. How much of your budget is not city funds or CDBG funds?
My budget is $1.8 million, and I get $25,000 from the city of Columbia. I get, just so you know, 50,000 CDBG, Richland County, and up until recently, I received an additional 25 discretionary from Richland County, and we actually receive, because of ARPA funding, more from Lexington County than both combined. I also pull up this data, 98% of our families come from Richland County because we can track within HMIS. So the money from Lexington County was to begin a pilot program in Lexington County. So we have not actually started pulling numbers for Lexington yet. So, and we have a 6% rate of return. So chronic for families, I hate the reciprocism, 6% will remain homeless after 18 months.
Thank you very much. Well, we will move on to Mercy. And in terms of time, we will adjourn around 6:15, so to give them the full 10 minutes and any questions that may arise. And again, Mercy is funded through our community development funds, and so their scope and their population may be a little bit different than some of the focus of this task force, but we're excited to have them here. Thank you.
It's difficult without a mouse pad up here. Okay. All right. As Councilor Bustles has said, Mercy's funds from the city do come, they're federal funds through CDBG. In 2020 to 2021, we received $45,000, 21 to 22, $40,000, and we recently received award notification for this year of $75,000. Those funds all go to support our youth that are exiting or at risk of homelessness. We operate a home for males 17 to 22 that are either coming straight out of homelessness or they've been identified by the school system, by the McKinney-Vento counselors in the schools as being at risk and typically like sleeping on friends' sofas and don't have a real good chance of graduating without some stable housing and supports. And then we also have youth that are in our Housing First that's funded through HUD. Since we started housing youth in late 2018, we've housed 84 youth. There are a lot of other things that Mercy does, and at the very end, I'll say what those are. I think that was the final question. Where do we see Mercy's role? So I just want to go ahead and jump into recommendations and answers to the 4 questions. So for addressing the growing number of unsheltered homeless, was glad to hear Councilor Brennan mention the other counties and municipalities. I've had that conversation repeatedly, I think, in the last 2 years with folks at both Richland County, Lexington County, City of Columbia, and other municipalities. And I really think we have to have a regional approach. This is not just City of Columbia. We've got to have, and not just the counties, I mean, we've got Casey, West Columbia, Irmo, Forest Acres, Blythewood, I mean, it goes on and on. It can't just be something that one group is trying to handle on their own. We have been recommending, and when I say we, I mean as a group of providers that would include Anita Floyd, who's now Mercy's Chief Operating Officer, but used to be at the Women's Shelter and at United Way addressing these same things. We've been saying for 20 years we need single room occupancy. If you go to cities that are doing a better job than we are, you're going to find that they have single room occupancy so that the folks that are unsheltered here on the street that aren't going to be able to make it until they address their addictions, their mental health issues, and other problems, they're not going to make it in an apartment. But a single room occupancy is a safe place for them to sleep. It has on-site facilities. They have bathrooms. They have shared eating space. Most have space on site for security. All have security. Most have space on site to include behavioral health care, basic physical health care, case management services, so that we can link people to what they need. It's not just putting them in a shelter bed for, 12 hours a night. We've got to do better at that. And I would say on the behavioral health care, it's no secret to any of us here that our system in South Carolina is stretched beyond its means. It has been for decades, and COVID has only made it worse. Our governor has even put out an executive order to examine that system. Health and Human Services is looking now at the possibilities of whether it would be privatized. Y'all have seen it all, whether we combine some type of mental health, substance use, and DHEC together. So our system for mental health has got to be addressed there. For improving the coordination of services, after 5, there again, I think it's that single room occupancy. Then, like Matt was saying earlier, during the winter months, you don't see as many people in the hospitality districts on the street. Well, if they had that single room occupancy year round with services on site, that would address a large part of it. Again, just to reiterate, the public restrooms, hospitality staff, I just kudos to the yellow shirts. My outreach workers love having access and working with the hospitality workers throughout the entertainment districts. And I'm sorry, I forgot this whole thing. I'm just talking. So, biggest challenges that I would see, again, just to reiterate what everyone's already said, we have a lack of affordable housing. We have over 5,000 people on a closed waiting list at Columbia Housing Authority. So just wrap your head around that. Over 5,000, and the list is closed. You can't sign somebody up right now. So we've got a huge lack of affordable housing. Shelter beds, the single room occupancy, funding is a big, big issue. There are a few people here today that I think participated back when we were putting together transitions, the model for transitions, which came to be through a partnership of the business community through the chamber and the nonprofits that were providing services. The Knight Foundation funded a large part of that development and sent us all several times to Miami to view the program, the Chapman Center that was operated there. We came back and implemented some of those things, but we didn't do the thing that made the biggest difference in Miami-Dade, and that was include a % in hospitality tax to fund the services. So we can go look at their great model, but if we don't pay attention to how they fund it, you know, we're skipping a step there that probably would help us get to success. I think there's also a need for incentives to develop affordable housing. You know, good Lord, if we had the kind of incentives for affordable housing that we've had for student housing developments in this area, we probably wouldn't have this task force right now. But that's definitely a need. To move then to how to streamline the 100+ services, I just need to say that I think the list of services is somewhat being taken out of context. It's not quite an accurate portrayal. We're in there, Mercy's in there numerous times, but we're one agency. In going through that, there were 3 permanent supportive housing programs out of, I think it's actually 102 that were in there. 60 of the services that were listed were food pantries, hygiene products, nice things, great things. I mean, it's wonderful that we have churches that have a food pantry that's open for 2 hours one Saturday a month. That's great. But that's not a service that's getting somebody out of housing. Chances are somebody that's out of homelessness into housing, chances are homeless individuals have no idea which Saturday of the month and which 2 hours they can go get food. And they're typically not getting food from pantries because they don't have anywhere to store it. So then to determine what our role is, Mercy's mission is to provide behavioral health care, outreach services, and affordable housing options, but it's for people who are vulnerable to the adverse consequences of mental illness. It's not the whole population. It's very specific to mental illness. We go out of our way. I hate that my good friend Judge Amy's not here today, because I'll tell you, I've heard mental health come up numerous times, and Chief Holbrook, I'm sure your officers are well aware of it. We send the same people. There aren't hospital beds. There are not acute or long-term hospital beds for people with mental illness. It took me, Councilwoman Devine, and Judge Amy to get one person off the street. You know who I'm talking about. He became my eldest child. I actually took guardianship of somebody that was in the ER 18 times in 20 days in November. But he's now living in a nursing home. But every time he would go, he couldn't be kept more than a couple days. He'd get sobered up and that'd be it. But now he has the right medications. He's doing great. The staff at the nursing home love him. They call me with updates. He has a guardian angel there, and they call me weekly with updates on him. But it took a counselor, our chief probate judge, and the director of an agency to get him off the street. So we've got to have better hospital access. Where I see our role is we'll continue to do outreach, but it's not going to be at 10 o'clock at night. I got a nurse practitioner that's out there screening people. I've got nurses going and giving shots. I've got licensed clinicians that are going out and screening, but there is nothing good that's going to come out of a mental health screening at 10 o'clock at night on the street. It's just not. The best time is during the day. So we do outreach, essential services, community-based mental health care, and supportive housing. And that's our role. And our budget's right at $7 million.
Can I ask you just a professional opinion, and this is a question, because we keep coming back to this, and I certainly respect you all as the subject matter experts on when somebody's most receptive to, assistance. Certainly not when they're maybe in crisis or late at night. But to use that example, like you just mentioned, what ends up happening is, and this goes to, the issue you take issue with, is we have that after-hours encounter with somebody that's in crisis, yet it's not the best time to engage, and there may not be a bed. So the default is they go to jail.
We need an SRO. That's where they would go.
Right.
And you would have on-site security.
Yeah, and typically, or they go to the hospital. And if they go to the hospital, it's usually just a pit stop, and they're usually pushed out the door, and then they close the door, and then they call the police, and then they go to jail. So obviously, that's not where they need to be. So it kind of brings me back to my point. We got to figure out this intermediate stop someplace, because we're spinning a lot of wheels, and it seems to be the conversation is always, after hours. And hours, it's not necessarily at 3 in the morning. Sometimes it's at 7:30 at night. It's just, after business hours. And I know in our business community especially, I think they feel that a lot too. And then the example you used of the individual that we had, the repeated contacts, that was frustrating for everybody, service providers, police, everything. But the impediment there was having a place to put this individual, to provide the,
Until we had him declared incompetent, nobody could make him stay there. He had to be declared, and I had to take guardianship.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be that hard, though. I mean, it was very difficult. I mean, and thank you for doing it. but
Kylie could address that better than I. We can't just keep somebody, we can't just say because you have a mental illness, you cannot leave this community care home. It's a very serious thing to declare somebody incompetent and appoint a guardian over them.
Yeah, but and there should be. It should be a high bar, no question about it. But one of the problems in that case was everything that everybody went through before we got him declared, and where he needed to be for proper care. To me, that's where the gap lies.
Well, and I can speak to that a little bit because this particular individual had a pending competency evaluation request for years that was never acted upon. And the only reason that we were able to get to this point is that because we were finally able to work with the city to do a direct probate petition after a competency evaluation happened in general sessions. So this individual is a perfect example of what happens when you have individuals who aren't able to engage in services because of this competency issue. And rather than taking action and doing that evaluation, we essentially waited for that general session.
But you're attaching competency issue to an arrest.
Well, the competency standard is the ability to be tried, which comes from a criminal charge.
I understand that, but it shouldn't be a criminal charge to begin with, theoretically.
Sure.
This person's in mental health crisis.
Sure, and there is a probate petition process that doesn't require a charge.
Right, and that's a process that doesn't work very well. That's my point.
He didn't have a charge for me to become his guardian.
Right. We did the probate petition outside of the criminal proceedings because we didn't have that mechanism in the court. And that's the one person that it's been, that we have gone outside of that proceeding on. And so it is an example of what can happen rather than waiting for that proceeding to take place.
Yeah. And not to dwell on this particular situation, because I'm very aware of that, and I'm so glad to hear that the resolution is positive. But the reason wasn't because a city council person and everybody got involved. It was because citizens in Five Points, business owners, saw this man dying in public. I mean, we
I
literally.
know, I did too.
And I'm so glad to hear, it makes my day to hear this. But the problem, I think, is this is just one person that may have had a mental health issue, but it could be addiction, it could be anything. And I hear, you know, we talk about the problem homeless that are resistant to care, that are resistant, they don't want to go into the program. That's what we deal with in the business districts. It's just my particular, point for being here. And, I asked earlier, where do they go? I mean, that was a rhetorical question. I know where they go. They go into the neighborhoods, and they come into the business district, and they make it hard for people to do business in Columbia, and they make it hard to have a safe neighborhood in some circumstances. And that's what I haven't heard anyone address, is how do we get out there and get to these people and get them the help that they may not even really want. And I know if anybody had that answer, by the way, they would stand up and say it, because I don't think we're to that point. So the work you do is obviously great, and in that circumstance, it was just amazing to get that gentleman the help that he needed. It is not compassionate to allow somebody to live on the street. And I saw every day that, he was eating just fine, sitting there, but then he wandered off to the park and slept in his own filth every night. And that's something we should not as a society kind of encourage. And I think some kind of engagement of those folks has to happen. And I'm not, by the way, the work you guys do is great. But that's what's got to happen.
He's an extreme. There are others we've worked with CPD on getting off the street. One of them, I saw him this morning making his appointment with his psychiatrist. But that's where, honestly, a single-room occupancy can help, because then when the police pick somebody up, you've got security on site. You can drop them off as long as if you have a 130-bed old hotel that you take and renovate, I mean, that's what we saw when we all went, with the Nord Family Foundation and United Way of the Midlands in 2015 to Salt Lake. Man, they had numerous hotels set up like that with the services on site. And then when they wake up the next morning, chances are they're going to be a little more inclined after a few days. It's not going to happen overnight. This doesn't start overnight, and it's not going to get fixed overnight. But they'll start building some trust. They get coffee, they get some breakfast with you. Then you say, hey, I've got this person over here that could help you with your substance issue if you're interested in talking about it, but they're not seeing you as a threat then. So that's a huge part.
Tremendous amount of engagement that you have to do. That's tremendous.
And I have to say, I live in a downtown neighborhood, and occasionally I do come across homeless individuals sleeping in the parks, but I've only had to call CPD when I've had drunk college students trying to break into my house when 5 Points closes at 2. So part of it, I just have to say, is the general public's uncomfortableness with somebody who's experiencing homelessness. Because people react different to somebody that's homeless than they do the drunk college kid.
Concerning each person having their own individual place. I think that would solve a lot of these problems, where we would have facilities where all the people, all the resources would be there for them. Because if you put them in a motel, they don't necessarily have to come out of those places, do they?
No, I think you heard Lila Anna address that earlier, that for people that are just in a hotel without rules, without expectations,
Exactly.
then it's hard to get people out of it.
And this way, they would have rules and regulations, and they would be able to participate in the things going on in the facility, like cleaning and things like that. It would teach them some responsibilities.
Okay, all right. Are there other questions that there might be for me?
Just a quick question. Did you say 7 million was your budget?
Yeah, our budget is $7 million, and we actually house about 335 people at any given time. But the only part we do with the city, which is why I didn't concentrate on our stuff and our results, In '21, our data analysis, we saved the hospital systems here $7 million in emergency room visits and hospitalizations. In '22, our data analysis came in at 5.7. We had a huge uptick in physical health, mainly related to COVID. It was respiratory, cardiac, and diabetes admissions, but it was still 5.7 million. Yeah, we have had a partnership with the Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs since 2010, I believe. And so everybody that is in our housing and services, we actually, anybody that's been in for at least a year, we're able to send their information annually, and RFA pulls the cost of hospitalization and emergency room visits that each person experienced in the year prior to coming into services with Mercy, and the year post coming into services and housing with Mercy. And then, so we've got over a decade of that. We have a retired statistician from RFA that does our analysis each year.
Makes sense.
Anything else?
Jennifer, did you want to jump in real quick?
Thank y'all for your.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I know we need to adjourn, so just a very quick comment. We have excellent outreach, very high-skilled outreach across several different agencies in the Columbia area. And that's important for engagement, to get people who are very hard to serve. But if you don't have housing, if you don't have the appropriate range of housing, what you have is you have an ambulance that has no hospital to go to. So, thank you for your work.
So we have a lot to think about over the next several weeks as we prepare for our next meeting. I want to thank the providers for taking the time, again, to be so thoughtful in their responses and really share some strategies that we can all start thinking about. This is just the beginning in terms of our continued discussions. I appreciate you all staying late. And I know if you have any follow-up questions, hopefully people will be able to hang out for a couple of minutes. But I will take a motion to adjourn this task force meeting. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.